Welcome back, Wargamers. Today I'm going to show you my method for making realistic looking terrain using some plaster, some sand, some PVA, a little bit of water, and some burnt umber brown paint. And what you will get is, I think, the most realistic depiction of dirt or earth that I've come across yet. Now, what I've used to do is just use PVA and sand when basing my characters and my terrain, and what you end up getting is really out of scale pieces of sand. If you're just trying to simulate dirt, those little sand kernels are much too big. It's more like your figures are standing on a sandbar, gravel bar, than actually in dirt. And I've used a lot of caulk and grit too, if you've watched any of my other videos, but it's often hard to get a nice smooth surface to your caulk when you're putting it down. It often dries with lines in it. So I found this to be the most realistic way to simulate your earth. So all you do is you take 1 part of plaster, mix in whatever amount of grit you want to. You can add a ton of sand in or just a really fine amount. And then I'm going to add an equal part of glue in there. So 1 part plaster and 1 part glue, and then 1 part water. And I will add a little bit of paint into this concoction. You don't have to do it. I just put a little bit of paint in there to give it some pigment so that when I base coat it, I won't be base coating over white, which I always hate to do. So just put my glue in, add an equal part of water, and then just a little bit of paint in there just to give a little tint to this mixture. All right, and it's as easy as that. And then we'll mix it all together. And as you'll see it, when this is mixing, it pretty much looks like you're dealing with mud or dirt. And when it dries, I think you'll like the result. So here we go. You just take an old brush and gonna mix it all together here. One word of caution is to make sure you do put an equal part of PVA in there. If you skimp on the PVA, then you'll find your plaster might flake off when it dries. So make sure you put in enough of the PVA glue. And once that's all mixed up, you can apply it to the base of your miniatures or your terrain. Here I just use an old popsicle stick. If you have an old brush that you don't mind ruining, you can use that to apply it as well. And if you get any of this on your model, it washes right off. It has a pretty long dry time, so as long as you catch it early, you won't worry about ruining your paint job on your figures. I'm rebasing these guys, which is why they have their paint jobs already. So now that our plaster concoction has dried, I'm going to go and I'm going to compare it to a figure here on the right that I've based using the traditional just sand and PVA method. And if you notice, the guy on the right, that grit is much more well defined. There's much more contrast on the base. It looks like the guy is standing on a gravel bar, standing in gravel, not really in earth. Whereas the guy on the left, his base is a lot more subtle. The texture is more subdued. It looks like pieces of rock, gravel encased in dirt, like you would find, out in a field. And so you can see there, it's not a huge difference between the texture of the two, but it's just enough to give more a feel of realism to your ground, your earth, if you use the plaster, rather than just PVA and sand. PVA and sand is, of course, easier, but if you just take a little bit more time, I think you'll get a better result for both your figures and your terrain. Now we're just going to do our quick and easy paint job of coating it with burnt umber, coat the entirety of the base. We're going to do my traditional triad that, if you've seen any of my other videos, that I use all the time. So after the burnt umber is done, we're going to mix a little bit of buff titanium into that burnt umber to get our midtone, and we're going to overbrush the base. Not really a dry brush here. I'm loading up the brush with quite a bit of paint, covering most of the base except for the deep recesses with this color. And then my final coat will be a high highlight of that buff titanium, wiping off nearly all the paint, doing a true dry brush, and just hitting the tops of the texture that appear on the base. And unlike a lot of times when I'm making my earth, I'm actually going to go and wash this with some Agrax Earth Shade to kind of tie the different colors together. Since the grid is a little bit more subtle, I want to make sure that I do define the recesses in between the texture. So just do a liberal dose of Agrax across the base. And now we'll just let the wash dry, and when we come back, we'll see the end result of using this new method. So here he is, now that the wash is dried, and I really am a fan of this new concoction that I've stumbled across. I really do think it gives more realistic looking earth than, let's bring this guy back, than if we're just using PVA and sand. much more subtle texture. It makes it look like he's standing in a field, not on a gravel bar. I really think that this will be my new method for basing most of my figures, and I think I'm going to start transferring it over to my terrain as well. So hopefully you found this useful. You can use this again. There's many applications for using this combination of ingredients, of using this plaster mixture. You can use it for big terrain pieces down to here, just guys on 32 millimeter bases. If you did like this video, please do subscribe, hit that like button, leave me a comment if you have your own basing method that you would like me to look at or explore, and I will see you next time.